On the 2nd of July 2025, the Freedom Front Plus delivered a press briefing following their return from the United States. A multi-sectoral South African delegation had travelled to Washington D.C. to engage in a series of senior-level discussions focused on the deteriorating relationship between South Africa and the United States. The central outcome of these engagements was the delivery of 4 firm preconditions set by the United States administration for the potential restoration of diplomatic and trade relations. The delegation sought to convey the extent of the harm caused by prevailing government policies in South Africa, particularly in the areas of economic performance, agricultural viability, and investor confidence. At the same time, they proposed pathways to recovery and renewed partnership with Western nations. Welcome to the Renewal Show, where I look at those stories that affect every South African in some or other way. Before I can start this all, let's look at the delegates who went to the United States. The delegation members were Dr. Corné Mulder, the leader of the Freedom Front Plus and the convener of the delegation. Dr. Theo de Jager, the executive director of the Southern African Agri Initiative, or SAI. Gerard Papenfuss, the chief executive of the National Employers Association of South Africa. And Chris Opperman, representative from C5 Capital, a US-based firm that facilitated the visit. The visit took place against the backdrop of a steadily weakening relationship between South Africa and the United States. This deterioration had become increasingly evident in the recent months, with American policymakers expressing unease over several key issues. Foremost among these were South Africa's continued endorsement of expropriation without compensation, the escalation of violent attacks on farmers in rural areas, and a foreign policy approach that appeared to align more frequently with actors and agendas at odds with Western democratic norms. Recognizing the growing gap in understanding between official diplomatic channels, a group of United States-based institutions, including the strategic investment firm C5 Capital, extended a formal invitation to a South African delegation. Their aim was to obtain a first-hand account of the domestic challenges facing South Africa, presented by individuals with direct experience in the social and economic consequences of current government policy. These institutions argued that such a perspective was largely absent from traditional state-level engagement, which often fails to convey the lived reality of South African citizens. Importantly, the delegation's mission was not one of protest or grievance. Rather, it was a forward-looking effort to advocate for a sustainable and inclusive vision of prosperity. Through candid dialogue and evidence-based presentations, the delegates sought to position South Africa as a country with untapped potential. Provided that key policy and governance concerns are addressed, they articulated a value proposition centered on mutual benefit, emphasizing the stabilizing role of international partnerships and the critical importance of restoring investor confidence, food security, and economic resilience. During the course of the visit, the South African delegation secured rare and substantive access to key decision makers and policy influencers across a broad spectrum of the United States governance and policy landscape. This high-level engagement reflected a strong interest from American counterparts in gaining a clearer understanding of South Africa's internal dynamics and potential trajectory of its global positioning. At the executive level, the delegation held discussions with senior officials stationed within the office of the Vice President, as well as advisors serving on the National Security Council. These engagements provided insight into the strategic considerations shaping the White House's view of South Africa as a regional actor and global partner. Legislatively, the delegation met with elected representatives from both chambers of the United States Congress. This included interactions with senators and members of the House of Representatives who serve on committees dealing with foreign relations and African affairs. These dialogues created an opportunity to share nuanced perspectives often absent from standard diplomatic briefings. From the Department of State, the Bureau of African Affairs facilitated a focused exchange on bilateral priorities, regional cooperation, and the future of multilateral engagement. The delegation was also received by leading public policy institutions, including the Hudson Institute, the Cato Institute, and the America First Policy Institute. Each of these think tanks brought distinctive ideological frameworks to the conversation, helping to broaden the strategic discourse around investment, governance, and international alignment. Finally, the delegation held sector-specific meetings with major agricultural unions and representatives from the United States business and investment community. These discussions centered on shared commercial interests, trade resilience, and the risks posed by policy uncertainty. The willingness of these actors to engage directly signaled a continued appetite for partnership, contingent on the pursuit of regulatory stability and mutual economic benefit. The delegation conveyed that the United States administration had delivered a message of firm conditionality regarding any future normalization of diplomatic and economic relations with South Africa. According to the briefing, this position was communicated with clarity and consistency across engagements, and is anchored in 4 specific expectations, which the administration views as foundational to restoring mutual trust and cooperation. The United States called for decisive action to improve safety in rural areas. In particular, the continued prevalence of attacks on farms in remote communities was identified as a major source of concern. American officials emphasized the need for these acts to be designated as priority crimes, warranting immediate and sustained intervention by an elite investigative unit such as the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation. The administration stressed the importance of a clear and public repudiation of insightful rhetoric. The ANC, as the governing party, was urged to issue an unequivocal denouncement of the slogan, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," along with all similar expressions of hate speech that undermine social cohesion and international standing. Respect for property rights emerged as a non-negotiable principle. The United States expressed its disapproval of the policy of expropriation without compensation, asserting that any future land reform efforts must be guided by constitutional principles. Specifically, expropriation should be accompanied by fair compensation that reflects prevailing market value, and must unfold through transparent and lawful procedures. The delegation reported a strong emphasis on economic policy reform. American businesses operating in South Africa raised objections to the race-based regulatory framework embedded in current empowerment legislation, specifically black economic empowerment. The administration advocated for the exemption of foreign firms from these requirements, which are perceived as non-tariff barriers to investment and trade. The stated objective was to ensure an open and competitive environment that encourages participation from all international partners without ideological restrictions. These 4 conditions, as relayed by the delegation, are seen by Washington not merely as policy preferences, but as essential indicators of South Africa's future trajectory, both as a trade partner and as a democratic ally in a changing global order. The delegation presented a series of substantive reflections that underscored both the opportunities and risks facing South Africa's economic future and its strategic relationship with the United States. On economic policy, Mr. Papenfuss delivered a pointed critique of prevailing legislative frameworks, particularly the Black economic empowerment and employment equity policies. He argued that these instruments are not simply tools for redress, but are being employed to systematically reconfigure the economic landscape along racial lines. From this perspective, the policies were described as antithetical to the principles of a free market economy. The consequence has been a sharp erosion in business confidence, with both domestic enterprises and international investors growing increasingly hesitant to commit capital to a regulatory environment perceived as exclusionary and politically volatile. In the agricultural sector, Dr. De Jager framed South Africa's commercial farming community as one of the country's most strategic assets with continental significance. He contended that unlocking this potential requires the establishment of a coherent and dependable policy climate. This includes the legal assurance of property rights, institutional access to finance, and mechanisms that incentivize innovation and productivity. According to Dr. De Jager, such conditions would not only drive domestic wealth creation, but could also contribute meaningfully to resolving broader challenges such as economic displacement and migration across the African continent. Concerning trade relations, the delegation issued a direct warning regarding the future of South Africa's preferential status under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. They reported that influential voices in the United States are increasingly skeptical about South Africa's eligibility for continued benefits under the agreement, especially in light of recent policy trajectories and foreign alignments. However, it was noted that no final determination has yet been made, suggesting that there remains a window of opportunity to recalibrate and repair the relationship through substantive reforms. With respect to governance, the US is hopeful that the GNU will succeed, as it is seen as a positive development for stability and investor confidence. However, there are serious concerns about its fragility and internal policy contradictions. The delegation concluded their visit with a clear undertaking to formally relay the substance of their discussions to President Cyril Ramaphosa and the broader leadership of the Government of National Unity. This commitment includes not only the 4 preconditions conveyed by the United States administration, but also the full strategic context in which those expectations were presented. The delegation emphasized that these messages would be delivered through appropriate diplomatic and political channels to ensure that the gravity of the situation is fully understood at the highest levels of government. In their closing briefings, members of the delegation underscored the critical urgency of South Africa's current trajectory. They warned that the national economy is no longer in a state of slow decline. It is approaching a moment of severe acceleration toward systemic failure. The expression "accelerate towards a cliff" was used to illustrate the perceived imminence of collapse unless specific policy interventions are urgently adopted. According to the delegation, continued adherence to ideologically driven and economically corrosive frameworks will further erode investor trust, diminish international cooperation, and exacerbate existing social and fiscal vulnerabilities. Whether the delegation's visit to the United States yielded a positive outcome remains a subject to interpretation, largely depending on one's position within South Africa's political landscape. For those aligned with the ANC and its ideological framework, the 4 preconditions proposed by the United States administration may appear intrusive or even unjust. However, others view them as constructive signposts, an early indication of the policy recalibrations necessary to restore both economic vitality and democratic accountability. Within this latter perspective, the delegation's efforts are seen as a meaningful first step towards aligning South Africa's internal governance with the expectations of international economic partners. The proposed reforms are not presented as ultimatums, but as opportunities for course correction. They offer a potential roadmap for policies that serve the broader public good rather than narrow partisan objectives. One area of particular focus is the future of BEE. In its current form, BEE has shifted from a redress mechanism into a burdensome regulatory structure that distorts the market and inhibits entrepreneurial growth. Exempting foreign investors from such requirements could serve as a live demonstration of the benefits of a more open and competitive business environment. Should these benefits become evident in terms of job creation, productivity, and economic momentum, it may strengthen the case for wider reform across all sectors of the domestic economy. The recommendations are not an imposition, but a reflection of shared interest. Rebuilding trust with major trading partners, particularly one as consequential as the United States, is not about relinquishing sovereignty. It is about positioning South Africa within a global system in a way that maximizes benefit for its people. Failure to do so could result in deep and lasting consequences, including the loss of trade privileges and diminished investor engagement. What do you make of all of this? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and please let's keep it respectful. Thank you for watching, and if you found any value in this video, please do like, share and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.